Hello, hello, and welcome. Welcome on into the swear word. I'm your host, Brandon Swear. And hey, this is a podcast for the chilihead community by the chilihead community. Regardless of your spice tolerance, this is the place for you. Up tonight, have an amazing episode, locked and loaded. It's going to be a very informational, gathering, understanding, educational purpose type of episode. So, episode 187 starts now. What's going on, Swear Nation? So glad to have everyone here. Whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Spotify, Rumble, and or Apple Podcasts, thank you so much for being here and continuing to make this podcast what it is. Tonight, we're going to be discussing what actually happens inside your body when capsaicin collides with things like alcohol or cannabis or nicotine or medications or maybe some dopamine spikes or even things like runner's high. Is spicy food really dangerous for certain substances? Can capsaicin amplify feelings? Can it suppress appetite? Can it alter pain perception? Can it change the way your body reacts to stress, chemicals, or other stimulants? Because ultimately, we want to know, why do some people crave spicy food when they're drinking and why others completely avoid it altogether? Why some chili heads describe the extreme heat almost like a euphoric experience. And quite possibly the biggest question of them all, is there actually a measurable connection between capsaicin, dopamine, endorphins, adrenaline, and the same reward systems involved in exercise, risk-taking, and controlled discomfort? So tonight we're diving deep into one of the most misunderstood conversations in the entire world of hot. But now, before we go any further in this episode, it's strictly educational. It is not to be used as medical advice. It is not encouraging to misuse substances, and it's not something to glamorize risky behavior. This episode is about understanding the body, understanding capsaicin, understanding the psychology, and exploring how spicy food interacts with different conditions, substances, medications, and overall experiences. Because the deeper you look into the science of spice, the more fascinating that it ultimately becomes. So welcome back to the Swear Word Podcast, and tonight we're going deep. All right, so let's talk about capsaicin. So before we can really discuss the interactions between capsaicin and alcohol, or capsaicin and cannabis, or capsaicin and nicotine, medications, or any of those runner's high, we first need to understand what capsaicin really is. And I'm sure for the majority of those watching and listening, this is going to be something you already have a strong understanding about. But there's so many people joining in, curious about the world of hot, that it would be not in the best interest to just glaze over this. So we will just do a quick recap on it. But because one of the biggest misunderstandings in the spicy food world is people think that ultimately peppers create heat. And technically they don't. Capsaicin is not heat, and capsaicin is a chemical compound. So what it does is actually pretty incredible. Capsaicin binds to something in your body that's called the TRPV1 receptor. Now, that sounds a little bit complicated, but ultimately, here's the simplified explanation. These receptors are essentially biological warning systems that help your body detect dangerous temperatures. Normally, these receptors activate when something is physically hot or could potentially cause damage to your tissues. But capsaicin really kind of just cheats the system in this. It tricks those receptors into firing off warning signals, even though there's no actual thermal danger. So your body receives a message saying something is burning you, even though nothing technically is. That's why your face gets flush. That's why your eyes water. That's why you sweat. And that's why your heart rate can increase. And that's why you start to panic. Your nervous system is reacting to a perceived threat. And that's where things in this conversation start to get a little bit interesting because the body doesn't just experience pain during capsaicin exposure, it also responds afterwards. And the response, in many ways, is what the chiliheads have become fascinated by. When your body starts to experience the stress, especially in controlled stress like eating peppers, it often releases chemicals to help manage and recover from that experience. That can include things like endorphins, adrenaline, dopamine, or stress adaptation responses. So suddenly, spicy food becomes more than flavor, and for some people, it becomes excitement. It becomes a challenge, a ritual, a community, or even an experience. And that's why you'll hear chili heads describe certain pepper experiences almost emotionally, not just physically. And honestly, if you've ever had a truly intense super hot experience, you probably understand exactly what I mean. Maybe it was your first Carolina Reaper. Maybe it was your first 7-Pot Primo. Maybe it was your first raw ghost pepper. And maybe it was the first challenge sauce you've ever dabbled in. You probably remember where you were, who you were with, and how your body reacted. How your brain reacted. Because those experiences create a very strong neurological memory. And tonight, we're going to explore how that reaction changes under different circumstances. So, capsaicin and alcohol. Let's start to talk a little bit more and move into one of the most common pairings in human culture: spicy food and alcohol. These two have existed side by side for generations, from bar food to wings, loaded nachos, spicy tacos, hot chicken, street food, late night food culture. It's everywhere. And a lot of people assume that alcohol somehow neutralizes spicy food. But the reality is far more complicated. Now, chemically speaking, capsaicin is oil soluble. That means water is actually terrible at removing it. And that's why when somebody eats a super hot pepper and immediately grabs water, it usually makes things a lot worse because the water spreads the capsaicin oils around the mouth, as to where dairy products tend to work a little bit better because the casein proteins that help break down and remove those capsaicin. Now, the alcohol can help dissolve capsaicin better than water, but there is a bit of a catch here, as most alcoholic beverages people drink are not high enough in alcohol concentration to be especially effective. Beer, especially, is often very ineffective. So the idea that alcohol is some magical cure for spice really is not accurate. Now, psychologically, this is where things can get interesting. Alcohol changes behavior. It lowers inhibition. It alters the risk assessment. It can dull pain perception temporarily. And because of that, people often attempt hotter foods while drinking. If you have ever been to a hot sauce festival, a spicy challenge event, or just a backyard gathering in general, you've probably seen this happen. Somebody gets a few drinks in them, and then suddenly they think they can conquer the world. They grab the hottest sauce on the table, or they eat something reckless, and then they underestimate the consequences. And then, well, reality arrives fast. Another thing that people don't realize is that both alcohol and capsaicin can irritate the digestive system. Now, this varies heavily from person to person. Some individuals tolerate both perfectly fine, while others experience acid reflux. They may experience some stomach discomfort. Others just start experiencing sweating, overheating, flush, and nausea. So alcohol can only contribute to the dehydration aspect, and capsaicin often increases sweating. So stacking those two together, especially in a hot outdoor environment, can be absolutely amplifying your discomfort. But culturally, spicy foods and alcohol continue to coexist because they create stimulation, intensity, excitement, and social bonding. And honestly, humans have been fascinated by controlled intensity. That's a major theme in tonight's episode. So now let's move into another conversation that people are extremely curious about. Now, with the rise of more and more states looking at a medical approach, and as the federal government moves to a medical approach, I see this conversation and topic be brought up quite a bit. Capsaicin and cannabis. This is where things really start to get incredibly interesting from both a sensory and a neurological perception, because there are some overlapping systems that are ultimately involved in here. Now, again, this is not encouraging the use. This is just strictly a educational discussion, because cannabis interacts with the body's endocannabinoid system. The same system plays a role in things like mood, stress, pain perception, appetite, and sensory processing. And capsaicin also affects the stress response and pain pathways. So when the two are combined, some users report dramatically different spice experiences. Some people say flavors become more vivid, more layered, more immersive, while others say that the heat becomes overwhelming, especially with anxiety-prone individuals. So things like dry mouth can also worsen the experience because the saliva helps move the capsaicin away from the tissues. And if your mouth is dry, the burn feels amplified. Another interesting thing in this appetite suppression stimulation, late night spicy food cravings are practically a cultural stereotype at this point. And honestly, there is probably neurological truth behind that. Novelty foods, strong stimulation, heavy flavors, comfort foods, sensory intensity, these things often become more appealing under an altered sensory condition. Now, another thing that I think deserves discussion is why spicy food communities and cannabis culture sometimes overlap socially. Both communities often involve things like exploration, tolerance building, novel experiences, community bonding, ritual behaviors, ultimately collecting products, sharing reactions. There are so many parallels, but not quite identical. Again, individual reactions vary dramatically. Some people love the combination, while others absolutely cannot handle it. But from a neuroscience standpoint, the overlap in stress response and sensory amplification makes this a genuinely fascinating topic here. Now let's talk nicotine. And this is one that I don't think gets talked about enough. Like, why do some nicotine users crave stronger and stronger sensory experiences? Obviously, this is not universal, but there are some interesting theories involving dopamine reinforcement and sensory adaptation. Nicotine affects the reward pathways, the habit loops, the stimulation, and attention. And over time, heavy smokers especially can experience altered taste perception. Food may taste duller, certain flavors may become muted, so naturally, strong flavors become more appealing. More salt, more smoke, more spice, more intensity. These may practically explain why spicy foods have historically existed heavily in environments where smoking culture, grilling culture, bar culture, and outdoor social gatherings. Now, modern nicotine delivery systems add a new layer. You have things like vapes and nicotine pouches and smokeless products. Each affect the mouth in the sensory systems differently. Some users report increased throat irritation. Others report altered spice tolerance. But again, individual variation matters. So one fascinating psychological observation is that some people seem naturally drawn towards stronger sensory stimulation. Louder music, faster cars, extreme sports, intense workouts, super hot peppers, and sometimes those sensory-seeking individuals overlap. Not always, but often enough to be worth discussing. Now, we move on to a newer conversation happening in the spicy food world. I have seen quite a few sauce makers, quite a few enthusiasts, reviewers, etc., really start to take a look in consideration into this as the growing popularity has started to arise. Things like GLP-1 medications. This section, once again, strictly educational only. Anyone taking medications, ultimately talk to your doctor. They're going to know best. They're going to be qualified to make any kind of dietary decisions involving healthy consumption of capsaicin with these products. But let's go ahead and just jump on into what I was able to find. Now, GLP-1 medications have become increasingly discussed publicly because of ultimately the effects on appetite regulation and digestion. One thing that many people experience with these medications is a delayed gastric emptying, meaning the food stays in the stomach longer. And anyone that knows about, ultimately pushing themselves to extremes, you're going to want to end up having food in your gut to soften the blow as it hits. At least that is the common take. Now, combine that with the intense spicy food, and the reactions may drastically vary, but some individuals have reported spicy food helping suppress appetite, and others report severe discomfort, nausea, bloating, stomach irritation. And honestly, the online conversations about this are still evolving. The information available right now is anecdotal. Hardly anything to really base this off of because of just how recent this is in the market. But it's a conversation worth paying attention to because the spicy food industry is absolutely going to encounter this more frequently moving forward, especially as those medications become more and more common. And this starts to raise another interesting question. Could capsaicin eventually become more widely researched for appetite regulation? Is it possible? I think so. There are already discussions around thermogenesis and appetite effects. But again, this area needs to be carefully researched. Let's talk about some over-the-counter medications and everyday substances because this is where a lot of misconceptions exist. First up, things like antacids. A lot of people automatically assume spicy food creates stomach acid, but capsaicin itself does not necessarily create acid. What very often happens is that capsaicin irritates already sensitive systems. So individuals with acid reflux issues may notice worsening symptoms. Now, pain relievers are completely another category, especially things like Advil or Tylenol, because ultimately these themselves can sometimes irritate the stomach lining. So combining heavy use of these Advils, etc., and use of extremely spicy foods, especially on an empty stomach, you may not feel so great. Now let's talk about something that we all use at some point throughout the day, or the majority of us use through some point out the day, and may not even think about the way that it reacts with our body and capsaicin. Let's discuss caffeine. This one is huge in the overall challenge culture. You'll have people drinking energy drinks, coffee, maybe even pre-workouts well before they ever go into a challenge or think about eating anything spicy for the day. People stack stimulants with capsaicin all the time. But what do they do commonly between the two? Both increase sweating, both increase your stimulation, they increase your heart rate perception, they increase the alertness. So when people say, this pepper is going to make my heart explode, sometimes they also had 3 energy drinks beforehand. Context really does matter. Cold medications are another interesting category because capsaicin can temporarily create the feeling of opening the nasal passages. That's why spicy soups are often associated with colds. And honestly, there's a reason why spicy ramen becomes a comfort food for sick people. Then we have digestive enzymes and probiotics, a massive topic in chilihead communities because people are consistently discussing gut adaptation, building tolerance, improving digestion. And while some adaptations absolutely occur over time, everybody is different. Some people can train spice tolerance significantly, while others remain sensitive forever. And genetics play a huge role in this too. All right, so now that we've reached the section where I've been personally most excited about discussing tonight, this is really talking about the correlation of the runner's high and whether there is a meaningful connection between the biochemical response involved in endurance exercises and extreme spicy food experiences. Now, first, what is runner's high? Traditionally, it's associated with prolonged exercise causing a release of chemicals linked to mood elevation and stress reduction. This can include things like endorphins, dopamine, endocannabinoids, stress adaptation chemistry. And what's really fascinating here is the controlled capsaicin exposure may trigger several overlapping systems. Now, let me be clear. Eating a Carolina Reaper is not the same thing as running a marathon. But there is a conceptual overlap worth discussing here. Both of these things involve controlled discomfort, stress exposure, mental endurance, relief after survival, and a reward afterwards. And this may particularly explain why some people genuinely enjoy extremely painful, spicy experiences. Because afterwards, there can be relief, excitement, pride, adrenaline, community celebration, and overall achievement. This is also why challenge culture becomes so massive online. People love watching controlled chaos, and participants often describe the strange emotional reward afterwards, not because the pain itself is pleasurable, but because surviving the experience becomes much more rewarding. Now, compare it psychologically to, say, ice baths, saunas, extreme workouts, obstacle races, combat sports, endurance sports. Humans just repeatedly place themselves into controlled stress environments because overcoming difficulty changes emotional states. It changes the identity. And honestly, I think the part of why chilihead communities bond so strongly is because the shared discomfort it creates. It's that memorable social experience. It's powerful. Now, I also want to make something very importantly clear. This does not mean spicy food addiction works in the same way as substance addiction. Those are very different categories. However, there are some overlapping reward systems involved. You got dopamine reinforcement, ritual behavior, tolerance adaptation, novelty seeking, and of course, your social identity being built. And that overlap is scientifically fascinating. Maybe that's why some people continue to chase hotter and hotter peppers, not just because they enjoy the pain, but because they enjoy the mastery, the adaptation, the progress, community, and achievement. And honestly, there's something deeply human about it all. So before we close tonight's episode, let's rapid fire some myths off real quick here. Myth 1, spicy food causes ulcers. The reality is, ulcers are commonly associated with bacterial infections and other contributing factors. So, myth number 2, capsaicin destroys your taste buds. Man, have I heard this one far more than I would like to ever hear it ever again and admit. But the reality is, ultimately, it overwhelms the receptors temporarily. But As with anything, when your tolerance raises, you start to appreciate, pick up, and find those other notes. So, does it destroy your taste buds? No. Myth number 3, water helps spice burn. The reality is usually not. It often spreads the capsaicin around, making the whole burn more widespread and potentially could make it feel like it's much worse because now it has a wider area of effect. Next myth. People who love spicy food are crazy. The reality is there are measurable physical and psychological reasons why people enjoy a controlled intensity. And honestly, humans have always chased stimulation. That's just part of our nature. The deeper we study capsaicin, the more fascinating it becomes. This tiny compound from peppers can influence pain receptors, adrenaline, stress response, dopamine pathways, appetite, social bonding, emotional memory, challenge behavior, and identity. For some people, spicy food is just flavor. And for others, it becomes a hobby, a challenge, a passion, a sense of community, or even a lifestyle. And maybe that's why the world of heat keeps growing year after year. Because deep down, humans have always been fascinated by the line between danger and excitement. So if you enjoyed tonight's episode, share it with another chilihead. And I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a capsaicin rush? Have medications ever changed your spice tolerance? Do you think runner's high and spice highs have similarities? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll go ahead, check those out, and make sure to respond back to y'all as well. If you're in the DFW area or you're going to be out at Zest Fest this Friday, I'll be out there from Friday to Sunday. So head on out, come say hi, and I'll be live streaming throughout the event as well. So tune in or catch those replays if you're unable to watch. There's going to be some direct promo codes that I'll be sharing from certain booths. So for those that are watching along, you'll be able to grab some great products from some of these amazing vendors that'll be out there. Everything from hot sauce to spicy snacks, etc. So much more. So go ahead, get ready to meet those who are going to be at the show and learn a bit about what they have going on or any new products that they're really excited to share with everyone. Don't forget, new episodes drop every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Central. And if you're on a platform that allows for a 5-star rating and review of the podcast, please go ahead and do so. It helps us get in front of other chiliheads and maybe even those individuals that are curious about the world of hot, because remember, this is where you can find everything to do with the world of hot. Currently, we have some sponsorship opportunities available, so reach out via theswearword.net or on socials, and we'll get that conversation started. Let's take a moment for a quick moment for our current sponsors, podvision.io. If you're looking to grow your brand, start your brand, you've hit a bump in the road, you're trying to figure things out, highly recommend checking out podvision.io for all of those needs, as well as webdx.one. Whether you have an online site, you had a guy at one point, you lost contact, you never got around to building a website, highly recommend checking out webdx.one. Best of all, they get you looking great online while you get to focus on what you do best. I'm Brandon Swear, and from everything from the world of hot, this has been The Swear Word.